My name is Nico Steves. Podcasts this summer season will run 15 minutes each in a re-release of my book, The Constant Procession, the history of the Virgin Mary since she passed on. First up, I'd like to thank you for your listening to these weekly Constant Procession podcasts, and also for purchasing plus spreading the word about my book, The Very Fine Light, which is available on Amazon.com. This summertime, I'll podcast the entire audio version of my first book, The Constant Procession. I hope you enjoy these weekly 15-minute installments that will drop every Tuesday morning throughout the summer right here on NicoSteves.com. And if you want to hear the first episode, just search for episode number 512. The Constant Procession is about some of the most well-known apparitions of the Virgin Mary and how my dedication to the Theotokos, or Mother of God, came about. Also, from time to time during these weekly podcast drops, you'll hear updates about my newest book that is now undergoing the line edit process. This is the final creative step before publication. So stay tuned as I will include updates about this new book from time to time. Now, if you really want to keep up with the latest on the new book's self-publishing journey, join my email list at NicoSteves.com. Heck, for those who sign up and are interested, please know that I may be asking you for feedback about the book's title selection as well as the cover art design. So sign up today and tell a friend who may also enjoy this experience into a book being published. By the way, keep me posted on what you're up to in the comments section of my website or via email at nicosteves@gmail.com. And now, my first original work, The Constant Procession. Installment 13. Chapter 22. Unheeded Prayers. But Fatima's seer, Sister Lucia, realized another request relayed by her from the Madonna had gone unanswered. The Madonna requested mankind to pray for the Russian people. After the Bolsheviks seized power, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union sought to eliminate religion, or, failing that, utilize it for the purposes of the state. The second secret: if you pay heed to my requests, Russia will be converted and there will be peace. If not, Russia will spread her errors throughout the world, causing wars and persecutions against the Church. Many will suffer martyrdom, and the Holy Father will have much to suffer, and several nations will disappear. During the darkest days of World War II, under communist control, the Russian people defeated the Nazis as they approached the gates of Moscow. This defeat helped turn the tide of World War II against the Nazis. As the Nazis weakened, the dominance of Stalin and his communists, now well armed with weapons from the USA, became the new power in the land. And so, reflecting on the Great March of the Madonna, and also of men, Pope Pius XII on October 8th of 1945 said, quote, "If at times we feel ourselves bending under the weight of the cross, if the incomprehension or injustices of the world fill our hearts with bitterness, if the assaults of the enemies of God submit our courage and our perseverance to a severe trial, on this day, devoted to the Immaculate Virgin, we know where to find consolation and security. It is in our devotion to Mary, the Heavenly Queen, the Mother of God and our Mother. Trusting in her intercessions, we will walk confidently under the divine protection." As the war ended, the Allies had been victorious, with the new dominant world powers being the USA and the USSR. Europe, always fearful of the enormous size of the Russian forces, became alarmed as the USSR moved in, taking advantage of the post-war destruction, and established communist-style governments in the war-torn regions and former countries who surrounded her borders. Taking advantage of their huge army and new military assets, they encouraged civil wars to take advantage of the confusion and fear in the war-torn regions. The Russian communists would support local communist rebels and then puppet governments, which would follow under the shadow of this new USSR power. This altered the post-war landscape, and once under communist influence, these countries suffered a relentless effort to abolish religious practices. Legendary are the stories of enforcing punishment, demanding godlessness, and a trip to Siberia for those who tried to hold on to their religious beliefs and practices. This happened again and again in Poland and East Germany, Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Hungary, Ukraine, Bulgaria, and Albania. Abolition of religious books and practices, closing churches in all the Soviet Union, as well as these communist satellite countries. Priests and nuns would be punished, some even killed during this reign of terror. Even in France, just after the liberation, as the Great Return continued, it began to encounter fierce opposition from the communists who had returned to power in France. Still, the Great Return continued. In 1947, a Marian year was declared in Hungary. In spite of all sorts of shenanigans on the part of the Russians, Cardinal Mitznery had been able to participate in the Marian Congress of Ottawa, Canada. The Cardinal recalls in his memoirs, quote, "I opened this holy year in Eastergum on August 15, 1947. 60,000 pilgrims participated in the ceremony. All over the country, on the same day, 1.5 million of the faithful crowded various pilgrimage sites and sanctuaries dedicated to Our Lady. During the entire year, the congresses, which followed each other almost uninterruptedly, drew crowds of several 100,000 of the faithful." And so with the ardent devotion to Mary, the brave Hungarian cardinal shored up the faith and courage of his people everywhere in the face of the menacing persecutions. Quote, "The communists attempted in every way to impede the peaceful progress of the ceremonies and gatherings, and to disturb the sermons and allocutions, especially those of the cardinal. In the train stations, they no longer gave railway tickets to pilgrims. They would confiscate buses and trucks. On the pretext of an infectious epidemic, they would place districts under quarantine. Claiming the necessity of assuring traffic safety, they dispersed groups of pilgrims. To disturb the open-air ceremonies, they turned on tractor motors, and the use of loudspeakers and microphones were forbidden. Water and electricity were cut off." A few months later, on June 13, 1948, in Budapest, the police finally dispersed the procession. In spite of all this, over 4.5 million believers took part in the festivities and pilgrimages in Hungary that Marian year. From the beginning, the fervor to break religion became more accepted. Fear and intimidation increased with more and more persecutions taking place. One cannot question the intentions during those times in the USSR. They outlawed religious worship and made every effort to destroy or at least close churches. A spared church would be turned into a state museum. In Moscow, they destroyed one church on the Kremlin grounds the day it would celebrate its 300-year anniversary. Here in the heart of the USSR, freedom of worship no longer existed for the Russian people. And the USSR's free will use of power and might did indeed, quote, "cause war and great persecutions against the Church," unquote, as predicted by the Madonna. Chapter 23. A Society Without God. As with any mistake, the repercussions became unpredictable and often dangerous. A Seventh-day Adventist story is typical about the environment in 1947 in the days following World War II with religion banned. 21-year-old Mikhail Kuklikov, a recent graduate, had earned his certificate as a teacher. But his father had been put in prison for his religious practices several years before. So Mikhail, who also followed his faith, moved from their hometown Moscow to Latvia in hopes of staying under the radar. Almost before he settled down, the KGB arrested him. In his own words, this first-hand experience portrays the bleak story of people of faith in those times in the USSR. From his book, Though the Heavens Fall, quote, "I was shoved into a cell with several other prisoners. Most of them were Latvian nationalists accused of various political offenses against the new Soviet regime. "What did you do, Kuklikov, to get yourself thrown in with us?" I paused. "I am a Christian believer," I said. They glanced at each other, eyebrows raised, and I could feel the tension relaxed. "He's one of us after all, a poor guy whose ideas the party doesn't happen to agree with." And later on, quote, "The major simply stared at me for a while. 'You were educated in the Soviet school system. How is it possible you could become a Christian believer? And furthermore, how could you ever imagine that we would allow you to work in our educational system to mutilate and destroy the souls of our young people?' Since his question seemed not so much information-seeking as rhetorical, I did not reply. I've always found it interesting that my 5-year prison camp sentence ended the same month as did the life of Joseph Stalin. On March 5, 1953, Stalin died, and on March 18th, along with other prisoners whose terms had ended at that time, I exchanged camp life for, quote, eternal banishment, unquote. My destination was to be the remote fishing village of Murmansk in western Siberia, where the winter cold is severe. One day I received a parcel from my mother. I took great joy in being able to open it all by myself, all alone, not under the eye of a censor. My joy nearly doubled when I saw that the package contained a Bible. I could now read this Bible openly. If you've never been forced to read the Bible in secret and hide its presence from others, you can't possibly understand how much I enjoyed my new liberty. Chapter 24, Hot Pursuit in a Cold War. The godless regime's arrogance increased as its power over the people took tighter hold. With increasing confidence, they would take down individuals and entire organized sects and national churches alike, as witnessed by the Ukrainian Catholic Church. In this deliberate attack on religion, no institution has suffered more than the Ukrainian Catholic Church. Claiming millions of members in western Ukraine, the church leaders and laity alike had been repressed in a systematic fashion and forced to close under Soviet rule. Even today, official Soviet historiography goes as far as to note the church, quote, liquidated itself, unquote, in 1946. When the Russian Revolution in 1917 formed the first socialist state in the world and evolved into the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, it swallowed up numerous countries in the process, as predicted by the Madonna, and spread godlessness with the banishment of religious worship. It's difficult to quantify the human toll the communists created, both then and even harder to know the impact it has had on the present-day generations influenced by their communist rule. And so, though the Allies together defeated the Axis powers, putting an end to World War II, victory required new decisions on how to deal with the conquered countries. The decisions on how to restructure the new governments met with great philosophical differences and approach between the Allies. As the gulf between former Allies widened, there remained huge armies still deployed in Europe. A face-off seemed inevitable. But the world had changed with the advent of the new, more powerful atomic bomb. Now, the aftermath of battle had to factor in the unknown effects of radioactive fallout. This new long-term devastation as an outcome of traditional battle changed the nature of war as men knew it. So an uneasy truce remained between the former Allies. What resulted? A buildup of these new nuclear weapons by the former Allies to protect themselves from each other. The realities of this new type of war instilled shivers of paranoia across the world. The free world grappled with how to counter the aggressive territorial moves by the USSR. The thought of starting another hot war now would be out of the question. And so began the roots of a Cold War. New confrontations required new strategies and tactics, and change to meet each clash. One of the first friction points would be the last battle zone of World War II, Berlin. At the end of the war, the Allies had divided Germany. The USSR controlled East Germany. Britain, France, and the USA controlled the western sectors, or West Germany. As the Allies chose to remain in the capital, so they further divided the capital city into 4 parts in a similar arrangement. The USSR held the eastern sector known as East Berlin, and the British, French, and USA controlled the other sectors that became known as West Berlin. Soon the divided country began to rebuild. West Germany developed a robust economy. Not so in communist East Germany. In the capital, East Berliners began to seek ways to get out from under the USSR control and began to sneak into the British, French, and US sectors of West Berlin and on into West Germany. To stop this exodus, the communists decided to build a wall to control the situation, and so they built the Berlin Wall. East Berliners who tried to climb over the Berlin Wall to find freedom would be killed, shot to death if they attempted to escape the communist lifestyle. Desperate acts of escape did happen, as people would run into the barbed-wired no-man's land up over the wall if lucky. The unlucky ones died, shot by the East German soldiers on 24/7 patrols. This East-West divide became the symbolic new definition of war across the globe. A world divided, as predicted by the Madonna. Conventional war adjusted so that whenever a potential confrontation between the victors did occur, there evolved new protracted scenarios with no clear winners. This had become the new Cold War approach. Battles between ideologies would heat up, then cool down, much like the embers of a fire that smolders. The Korean War, which began soon after World War II, resulted in such a stalemate and divided the country of Korea into North Korea and South Korea, followed by troubles in Vietnam. The USSR and Communist Chinese armed, funded, and provided support for a North Vietnam. In this fight, efforts failed against the communist ideology that overran the anti-communists of beleaguered South Vietnam. Other divisions showed the great divide in the world. The space race propelled anxiety to the skies overhead. This, when combined with nuclear warheads, advanced to the battlegrounds. Nuclear missiles replaced foot soldiers as the major threat to the security of a country. The reality of atomic war, with no winners, but rather a mutual destruction mentality, resulted as the Cold War matured. Over the next several decades, it reached a peak where each side created enough nuclear weapons to destroy the other's major cities many times over. Cynicism evolved into fatalism in this brave new world of modern man. One irony is that the Madonna found her way into the USSR's quest for superpower status. The Kremlin became the communist government's center and showcase of its might. In order to represent this power, someone, perhaps a media person, made the choice to use as a backdrop the magnificent onion-domed former Russian Orthodox cathedral, which the communists had changed into a state museum. During the Cold War, this place achieved international recognition as a symbol of the USSR's communist power. The original name of this iconic backdrop, Church of the Intercessions of the Most Holy Mary, on the Moat. This is Nico Steves. I hope you enjoyed this installment. My book, The Very Fine Light, can be found using the title, The Very Fine Light, on Amazon.com. Please feel free to contact me at nicosteves.com. That's Nikos Steves, Steves.com. If you like this episode, and for more, share them with friends. This is Nico Steves. Thank you. See you next time.